Ma'am, why didn't you stop back there? You're acting like that doesn't apply to you.
Officer, I'm sure I have stopped. I'm just trying to get home from work.
I don't care. License and registration.
You're making a serious mistake. I'm a federal prosecutor.
I don't care what title you claim to be, but in here I decide everything.
The Axon body camera activated with a faint electronic chirp as the patrol car door closed, a sound so routine it barely registered. The afternoon was calm, almost uneventful, the kind of day officers described as quiet in their reports. Sunlight rested evenly across the residential street, illuminating parked cars, trimmed lawns, and mailboxes that blended into one another. Nothing about the scene suggested urgency or danger. The silver sedan pulled over immediately when the lights came on. No hesitation, no sudden movements. Inside the car sat a black woman in her mid-60s, posture upright, hands steady on the steering wheel. She had spent decades inside the justice system, long enough to understand how quickly ordinary encounters could shift when authority felt questioned. Calm compliance had become second nature to her. Her name was Helen Brooks. She was a prosecutor with more than 30 years of experience, someone who had reviewed officer conduct, argued cases built on traffic stops, and watched careers rise or collapse based on footage, just like this. That afternoon, she was driving home from work, thinking about nothing more than getting through traffic before dinner. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from by dropping your city or country in the comments. If this is your first time here, make sure you're subscribed and give the video a like. Stories like this only matter when people see them. Officer Derek Callahan approached the driver's side window without introducing himself. The body cam picked up the sound of his boots against the pavement, the faint rustle of his uniform, the subtle shift in his breathing as he stopped beside the door. His tone was flat and practiced. "You didn't come to a full stop back there." Helen nodded once. "Okay." It was the kind of response officers usually preferred. No argument, no denial, just acknowledgement. Callahan asked for her license and registration. She handed them over immediately, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The camera captured the moment his eyes moved from the documents to her face and back again. Something tightened in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. "Step out of the vehicle." The command came quickly, without explanation. Helen paused, surprised not by the request itself, but by how abruptly the stop had escalated. "Am I being cited or detained?" she asked evenly. Callahan didn't answer the question. "Step out." Helen opened the door and stepped onto the curb, moving carefully. Her posture remained composed, her hands relaxed at her sides. She wasn't resisting, she wasn't delaying. But the officer's stance suggested he had already decided how this encounter would be framed. "I'm a prosecutor," she said calmly. "I'm asking why this is escalating." "That doesn't matter," Callahan replied. The words were short, dismissive, and telling. They weren't about equality under the law. They were about control, about refusing to acknowledge context, experience, or consequence. The body cam captured them clearly. Callahan repositioned himself closer, issuing commands that stacked on one another. "Stand here, don't move, keep your hands visible." Each instruction came as though resistance was expected, even though none appeared. Helen complied with every directive, her expression neutral, her voice steady. The street remained quiet. A neighbor paused while unloading groceries, glanced over, then looked away. A car passed slowly behind them. Nothing about the scene suggested a threat, yet the officer's tone hardened. "Why'd you feel the need to say what you do for a living?" he asked. "You asked," Helen replied. He scoffed. "People like you always do." The comment was brief, almost casual, but it carried weight. Helen said nothing. Years in court had taught her that silence often spoke louder than argument, especially when a camera was running. A second patrol car arrived moments later. Backup that wasn't necessary, but that reinforced the imbalance of power. The second officer stood off to the side, observing, allowing Callahan to remain in control. Helen was informed she was being detained for obstruction, though no specific act was identified. When she asked for clarification, she was told it wasn't up for debate. The decision had already been made. Her hands were placed behind her back. The cuffs closed with a sharp metallic click that the microphone picked up clearly. She did not resist. She did not protest. "I am not resisting," she said. "I know," Callahan replied. That acknowledgement made the moment heavier. Neighbors now watched openly. Phones appeared. Whispers traveled across the street. A black woman in professional clothing stood cuffed on a quiet suburban block over a minor traffic stop that had spiraled beyond reason. Helen was placed into the back of the patrol car, the door shutting with a dull thud. Through the divider, she stared forward, her reflection faint in the plexiglass. She wasn't afraid. She was already thinking ahead, aware that every second of footage mattered. Outside, the body cam captured Callahan speaking to his partner, his tone defensive, shaping a narrative. He described her as argumentative, uncooperative, and difficult. None of it matched what the camera had recorded. Before the car pulled away, Helen spoke once more, her voice calm and precise. "For the record, I'm invoking my right to remain silent." The door closed. The street returned to stillness, but the consequences were already set in motion. What began as a routine stop had crossed a line, and that line was now preserved on video. The patrol car pulled away from the curb slowly, its tires crunching against loose gravel before merging back onto the main road. Inside the back seat, Helen Brooks sat upright, hands cuffed behind her, eyes fixed forward. The plexiglass divider reflected a faint outline of her face, calm, on the surface, focused underneath. She had been in police cars before, but always on the other side of the process. This time, she was the one being transported without a clear charge, based on an encounter that had unraveled far too quickly. In the front seats, the two officers spoke in low voices. The Axon body cam continued to record, capturing fragments of their conversation. Words like attitude, non-compliant, and argumentative surfaced repeatedly. Each label sounded rehearsed, as if they were being chosen not because they were accurate, but because they were familiar enough to justify what had already happened. Helen listened without reacting. Years in court had taught her that the moment to speak was not always the moment you were given. She knew the language they were using, knew how easily vague descriptions could be transformed into official reports. She also knew something else. The camera was still running. At the station, the atmosphere shifted from casual authority to procedural indifference. The patrol car stopped in a concrete lot behind the building, far from public view. Helen was guided inside through a side entrance, past blank walls and fluorescent lights that flattened everything they touched. Her cuffs were removed briefly for processing, then reapplied without explanation. She was asked routine questions: name, address, date of birth. She answered only what was legally required, her voice even, her tone professional. When an officer asked about her occupation again, she paused, then responded plainly, "I'm a prosecutor." The reaction was immediate, though subtle, a flicker of hesitation, a glance exchanged between officers, nothing said out loud. The system rarely acknowledged discomfort directly. Instead, it adjusted around it. She was placed in a holding room, not a cell, but close enough to feel the distinction was mostly cosmetic. A metal bench, a mounted camera in the corner, the door shut with a hollow sound that echoed longer than it should have. Minutes stretched, then more minutes, no paperwork, no clear explanation of what was happening next. Down the hall, Officer Callahan began typing his report. The body cam footage would later show him pacing as he dictated portions aloud, framing the stop as justified, the detention as necessary. He emphasized her questions. He downplayed her compliance. He avoided specifics where specifics would hurt him. She kept challenging me. She wouldn't just do what she was told. None of it aligned with the footage, but for the moment, the system accepted his version. Helen waited. She replayed the stop in her mind, not emotionally, but analytically. The phrasing, the tone, the timing, the moment the stop ceased being about traffic and became about control. She knew exactly how this would read to an internal review board, and she knew how it would sound to a jury if it ever went that far. About 40 minutes later, a supervisor appeared at the door. He introduced himself politely, his demeanor noticeably different from the officers who had brought her in. He asked if she needed water, if she was comfortable. Small gestures that signaled something important had shifted behind the scenes. "We're still sorting some things out," he said carefully. Helen nodded. "I understand." What she understood was that someone had already looked up her name. Downstairs, another officer had pulled her information, then paused. A prosecutor. Decades of service, a clean record, no history of disorderly conduct, no prior arrests. That pause had turned into a phone call. That phone call had turned into another. If you're still watching at this point, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this only come to light when people stay engaged long enough to see how the system really works. The supervisor returned a few minutes later, this time with paperwork in hand. Helen was informed that she was being released pending review. No formal charges would be filed at this time. The wording was intentional, designed to preserve the officer's authority while quietly undoing the situation. Her cuffs were removed, her belongings returned, no apology was offered. Helen walked out of the station into the fading afternoon light, her shoulders stiff, her jaw set. She declined a ride home. She wanted to walk, to feel steady ground beneath her feet again, to think clearly without the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. By the time she reached her front door, her decision was already made. She did not contact the media. She did not post online. She did not vent to colleagues. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, opened her laptop, and began documenting everything while it was still fresh. Times, names, exact phrasing, the sequence of events. She requested the body cam footage formally, under public records law, knowing that delay was often the department's first line of defense. The response came days later, polite, non-committal. The department thanked her for bringing the matter to their attention and assured her it would be reviewed internally. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no sense of urgency. Helen had seen this before. Internal reviews that went nowhere, complaints quietly closed, patterns ignored until someone with enough leverage forced them into the light. She forwarded the response to an attorney she trusted, a civil rights specialist who had built a career on cases departments preferred to forget. The attorney watched the footage in silence, rewinding certain moments, pausing on others. "This is a problem," she said finally, "and not just for him." The groundwork was being laid now, carefully and deliberately. Subpoenas would follow, records would be pulled, prior complaints would surface. The body cam that had captured a routine stop gone wrong was about to become the most expensive piece of equipment that department had ever issued. Helen closed her laptop and looked out the window as evening settled in. The stop sign at the end of her street was visible from her kitchen, red and unremarkable. It was strange how something so ordinary could trigger consequences this large. What had happened to her was over. What was about to happen to the department was just beginning. The first cracks didn't appear publicly. They surfaced quietly, behind closed doors, inside inboxes and internal databases that rarely saw daylight. Once Helen Brooks's attorney filed the formal notice of intent, the department was no longer in control of the timeline. Legal obligations replaced discretion, and records that had sat untouched for years were suddenly subject to scrutiny. The body cam footage was requested again, this time with statutory deadlines attached. Dispatch logs followed, then patrol assignments, then internal complaint histories tied to Officer Derek Callahan's badge number. What initially looked like an isolated incident began to resemble something else entirely. 2 prior complaints emerged within days. Both involved black women. Both described routine encounters that escalated without clear cause. One had been dismissed as unsubstantiated. The other had never advanced beyond an initial review. Neither involved body cam footage that had been examined closely. Until now. Helen's legal team moved deliberately. They did not leak the footage immediately. They didn't posture. They let the paper trail speak first. When depositions began, Callahan's version of events started to fracture. His written report emphasized defiance that never appeared on video. His timeline didn't match dispatch logs. His justifications shifted subtly each time he was asked to explain them. Under oath, small inconsistencies matter. Under video, they are fatal. The department attempted damage control. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation, announcing it publicly only after inquiries began coming in from outside agencies. A spokesperson released a short statement emphasizing that the matter was under review and that the department took all allegations seriously. It was the same language used every time. It convinced no one. When the footage was finally released, it spread quickly, not because it was dramatic, but because it was mundane. Viewers saw exactly what Helen's attorney had seen. A calm driver, a dismissive officer, escalation without justification, control asserted where none was required. Public reaction followed predictably. Civil rights organizations weighed in. Legal analysts broke down the exchange frame by frame. Former officers questioned the stop openly. The narrative the department had hoped to contain was now being shaped externally. Facing mounting pressure, the city's legal department reached out with an offer to settle. The number was substantial, but the conditions were familiar. A non-disclosure agreement, no admission of wrongdoing, quiet closure. Helen declined. Her lawsuit was filed in federal court the following week. It alleged unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and violation of constitutional rights. It named Officer Callahan individually and the department for failure to supervise and discipline. The damages sought totaled $1.8 million, a figure based not on spectacle but on precedent. Discovery was brutal. Internal emails revealed supervisors had been aware of Callahan's conduct but avoided formal discipline. Training records showed missed bias remediation sessions. Performance reviews noted communication issues without follow-up. The department's own documentation undermined its defense. Callahan was placed on unpaid suspension pending the outcome. His union issued a brief statement of support, then went quiet as the evidence stacked up. In his deposition, he struggled to reconcile his words with the footage. When asked why he escalated the stop, he offered explanations that contradicted one another. When asked why he ignored clear compliance, he had no answer. The trial never happened. 3 days before jury selection, the city settled. $2.1 million paid from municipal funds. No confidentiality clause. No admission of guilt, but no denial either. The terms were clear and final. Officer Derek Callahan resigned effective immediately. His certification was flagged for review by the state. His career in law enforcement was over. The department announced new training initiatives and oversight measures in the same press release that confirmed the settlement, hoping reform language would soften the blow. Helen Brooks returned to work quietly. Her record was cleared, her name remained intact. She did not celebrate the outcome. She treated it the way she had treated everything else, as a matter of accountability. In a brief statement, she made her position clear. This was not about money. It was about evidence, about what happens when power goes unchecked and cameras are ignored, about how many people never make it this far because they don't have the knowledge or resources to fight back. The stop sign at the end of her street still stands. Cars still roll through it every day. Most stops end the way they should. Some don't. The difference is whether anyone is watching and whether what they see is taken seriously. If this story made you think, take a moment to leave a comment with your perspective. Hit like if accountability matters to you, and subscribe so these stories don't disappear.